So you want to use your first SLR. You have a basic SLR camera and you want to take some photos with it, but you don't know how. Well, you come to the right place. I have here 3 examples of rather basic SLRs. These 2 use the same lens. I'll be using this one for demonstration. We have a Nikon F unmetered. We have a Minolta SRT 101 and a Minolta XE5. I'll be going through most of the stuff with the Nikon F and just showing you these to show some things about meters. Anyway, so I assume you got your camera. If you're a beginner, if you're sort of younger, you probably got your camera from a family member who used to have this camera and used to use it all the time and passed it on to you, or maybe you actually took an interest and kind of went proactive and bought one of these older cameras. But the thing is, you don't know how to use it. Well, in reality, these are actually quite simple to use. The SLR, which means single lens reflex, because there's only one lens here, and it reflects the light through the body. Actually, you can see there's a mirror in there. It reflects the light from the lens off that mirror up onto a ground glass, which I can show you here by removing the prism. There's a ground glass there, so if I mount this lens, it actually focuses the light onto that ground glass, so you can judge both your composition and your focus. And there is a roof pentaprism. See, you can actually see my hand here. This is called a roof pentaprism. It is most SLRs actually have these. If not, they have a we're talking 35mm SLRs here. If they don't have this, they actually have a mirror system to reflect it into your eye, but they all work the same in the end. You just look into this eyepiece, and it shows you what your scene is going to look like, the focus and the composition. Pretty straightforward. Now, this is a pretty basic SLR in this configuration. There's no meter. It just has a shutter. There's no automation. It is completely mechanical. This is about as simple as it can get. So that's why I'm using this as a demonstration tool. So first, I'll go over the different controls that you have available on the camera. First is usually on the top, although it can be around the shutter. The shutter control can be around the lens mount, like the Nikkor Mat or some Olympus cameras. This is your shutter speed. We'll get to that in a second. Around the lens is also usually going to be your aperture control. Typically, it's toward the lens mount. Some cameras, like on the Olympus OM system, it can be up on the in the front here. However, it's always going to be, well, most of the time, going to be around your lens. Likewise, around your lens is going to be a ring for focusing. Now, when you look through the viewfinder, we'll go over focusing first because that's going to be the easiest. When you look through the viewfinder, you will see the rectangular image of what the camera is seeing through the actual lens. When, let's say you have an object that's 10 feet away, the lens in its natural configuration is set to, as you can see here, infinity focus. That's what we call that, which means everything in vast distances, like landscapes, will be in focus. Things closer to that will not be in focus. So we need to focus the lens closer to us. And by that, we need to bring the lens further away from the camera. We do that by turning this ring. Now you'll see most lenses have the calibration in both feet and meters around the lens. So if we want to focus this by eye, if you know for a fact that object is 10 feet away from you, we can twist this on the feet scale to 10 feet. On this index here, you can see it lines up with the yellow 10, which is the 10-foot mark. And we know that that object at 10 feet will be in focus. The other way to do it is you look through the ground glass. This one here, I'll actually show you because this one has a removable prism. This is what is called, I'll actually remove the ground glass. This is what is called a basic ground glass, a plain ground glass. For Nikon users, this is called the B screen. This is literally just a piece of ground glass. There is nothing else to this. It just takes well, there's a Fresnel, but that's about it. which brightens the image. It takes the light that is being focused by the lens and focuses it all on this plane. There are some other viewfinders, like I'll show you here. My Minolta SRT here has a more complex focusing screen. I don't know if you can make that out. You cannot make that out. Okay, excellent. So never mind on that. But anyway, I'll draw it then. Luckily, I have some paper here. I'll draw a simple viewfinder window here. Just imagine this is the frame that you're looking at. I'll put this actually back before I draw this so I don't scratch this, because these are kind of pricey if you have to keep replacing them. This is a plain ground glass. This is what you see, just the image. That's it. A lot of times, you will have a little circle in the middle, and that will be split into two. And when your camera is out of focus, when your lens is out of focus, you will see two images. Well, you see the big image around here, but you'll see two individual images in these two sectors of this circle, and they will not be in alignment. They will be out of alignment. When you bring the lens into focus, they will align, and then once you pass the focus, they'll align out of focus, out of alignment the other way. So you want to get those into alignment side by side. This is called a split prism. Sometimes these split prisms are combined with another ring around here that has sort of a kind of crosshatch look to it, and when it's out of focus, it's shimmery. The image kind of looks broken up. It's kind of sparkly. Once you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Once it's in focus, it becomes completely clear, and it's not shimmery. And then once you pass focus, it becomes shimmery once again. This is called a microprism focusing aid. Now, sometimes, instead of just having the split prism in the middle, you'll have just a little dot of microprism in the middle. Sometimes you'll have both. Sometimes this split prism will be on a 45-degree angle. It doesn't matter. As long as you realize how to use each one of these, you will be able to focus. Remember, if it's just a ground glass, you just focus it until everything appears sharp. That's pretty easy. That's what I like to do most of the time, which is why I put this screen in this camera. If it's the split prism, you want to make both of those images align. If it's the microprism array, you want to make it stop shimmering. Once you have that in focus, you're good and you're ready to calculate your exposure. Now, I will explain what both controls on the camera do now. So let me take the camera apart to show you. I'll actually move the mirror up so you can actually see the shutter directly. Now, first we'll talk about shutter speed. Actually, not yet. We'll talk about the relation of exposure. This is called the exposure triangle. Now you have three things. You have the shutter speed on one corner. You have your aperture on another corner. And you have your film speed on the last corner. All three of these equally play into the final exposure of the image. So, we're going to talk about shutter speed first, like I just said. Sorry, I'm a bit scatterbrained on this. So, this rectangle here is where the film travels over the film plane. It'll look something like this. I'm not paid by this company, so I'm covering up their name. It's going to roughly look like that as it travels across the film plane. And this here, this what looks to be a cloth, that's actually, in this camera, it's made of titanium. That's your shutter curtain. So that is what actually blocks the light from getting to the film. When I cock the shutter, you saw it kind of move over to the side. There's two shutter curtains in most SLRs, and one opens when you begin the exposure, and the other one closes it. For speeds up to what is called a flash sync speed, we'll get there in a second, the two curtains act independently like that, and the whole window is open. For anything faster than that, it'll actually travel like that across the film gate. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. What does the shutter do? It controls how much light gets to the film by controlling how much time the film can see the image. Pretty simple once you explain it. This dial up here has several numbers inscribed on it, from 1 to 1,000. These are all fractions of a second. So if you can imagine 1 over 1, that's 1 full second. Likewise, this pink number here, that says 60. That's 1 over 60. That's 1/60th of a second. And all the way up to 1,000. That's 1 over 1,000. That is 1/1000th of a second. You'll notice there's a pattern in these numbers. Each one is roughly twice the amount of the previous one. So, if you've already guessed, each time you twist this knob this way, and the number decreases, that actually increases your exposure. Each click increases it by twice. So it doubles the amount of light that gets to the film. Likewise, if you twist it the other direction, it halves the amount of light getting to the film with each click. So let me demonstrate what this shutter looks like in action. I'm going to start with an eighth of a second here. You see that opened and closed in an eighth of a second. Pretty easy. I can go up to a 30th of a second. See, that's much quicker. Now if I go up to 1/500th of a second, you could barely even tell that it tripped because the shutter was so fast. You can barely make out a 500th of a second, and besides, the camera I'm recording this on has too slow of a frame rate to even capture it anyway, so you can't see it. So, keep in mind the fact that you have the doubling in one direction and halving in the other direction of your light, because you need a certain amount of light to get to the film. We'll look at the lens next. The lens has another way of moderating how much light gets to your film. We call this the aperture. This is this mechanism in the middle of the lens there that opens and closes. We call this is f16, and in this lens, this is f2. You can tell the maximum aperture of the lens by what number it says on the front. Usually it'll have a 1, a colon, and then the number. That number is your maximum aperture. The f in f numbers, you'll notice I keep saying f16, f8, f2. What does that f mean? Well, as you'll see how I drew on this diagram here, that's a curly f. In mathematics, that denotes a function. And exactly that's what it is. It's a function. Your f number is equal to the focal length, which we term capital F, of the lens divided by the diameter of your aperture. So that's your f-stop equals the focal length over the diameter of your aperture. So simply what that means is the focal length of this lens is 50 millimeters, which tells you how far the lens is from the film plane, and by that we can tell the angle of view of the lens. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. F2 means that there have to be two of these, you can see here, two of these diameters to make up 50 millimeters. So in this case, since that's F2, this happens to be around 25 millimeters across. When I stop this down to F16, you can see that's a much smaller hole. That's 1/16th the distance between the lens and the film. You'll notice that there's a pattern, again, between these numbers, just like the shutter speeds. Now, these numbers don't actually double for each one, but there is a geometric sequence. You could see every other number doubles. Now, since this is a circle that we're talking about, or practically a circle that we're talking about, each halving of the diameter quarters the light. Therefore, we need to make another step. So, if you haven't guessed already, each click that we give this, each stop we call these, halves the light. So if I go from f4 to f5.6, or as most people call it, f5.6, that halves the amount of light. Likewise, f5.6 to f8, that I just halve the amount of light again. Or I can do the opposite. If I go from f8 to f5.6, I just double the amount of light. And if I go from 5.6 to f4 again, I double the amount of light again. You can use these two in conjunction with each other. So if I put this lens back on the camera like it would be used you can actually do something like this. To get the same amount of exposure, let's say I have the camera set at f5.6 and 1/60th of a second. And let's assume that that is proper exposure. That is letting the proper amount of light get to the film to create a good image. If I want to get the same exposure as that, I can open that up to f4, but also speed up to 1/125th of a second. Remember, since I went from f5.6 to f4, I doubled the amount of light that's going through the lens. But since I also sped up the shutter by twice, I halved the amount of light going through the shutter. Since those cancel out, we have the same exposure. It goes the same way. Let's set that back to 5.6 at 60. If I put that to f8, I just halve the amount of light, so I need to double the amount of light with the shutter. Again, that gives us the same exposure and will create a correctly exposed image. Why would we want to do this? Well, I'll get to that a bit more in a second when I talk about the focal lengths of the lenses. But in general, the aperture that you set the lens to controls the look of the photo, and also the shutter speed that you use controls how fast of action you can actually freeze in the photograph. As you can imagine, if you set this to 1/8 of a second, you can't capture fast action because in the time of exposure, whatever you're capturing has moved already, where 1,000th of a second will really freeze action very well. Okay, now to the last pillar of the triangle here, the ASA. This is sometimes called ASA, other times called ISO. This number means the exact same thing. It's how fast your film is. Now, what do I mean by how fast the film is? Well, you'll see here. This is a film can of Kodak Plus X. They don't really make this anymore, but it's just one I have handy. You'll see here it says ASA 125 on there. That is your film speed. Likewise, I have a canister of Ilford XP2 here. You'll see it says 400 on it in big numerals, and underneath where I wrote test, it'll say ISO 400 / 27 degrees. Well, ignore the 27 degrees for now. That is irrelevant. That's for Europe, and we're not using Europe numbers because I live in America, so I'm not using the European numbers. Anyway, every film sold nowadays has this number attached to it, and that is how sensitive the film is. The higher the number, the more sensitive the film is. So, and conveniently, this system relies on the same halving and doubling the amount of light that the shutter and the aperture also rely on. So, the two most common speeds of film are 100 ASA, also called 100 ISO. I say ASA, so that's what I'm going to be using in the video. Anyway, the two most common speeds of film are 100 ASA and 400 ASA. You can correctly guess that 400 ASA film is 4 times the sensitivity of 100 ASA film. If you wanted a film that's twice the sensitivity of 100 ASA film, that would be 200. If you wanted it half, that would be 50 ASA. You see, it's very intuitive once you figure it out. 100 ASA film is good for taking photos outside on sunny days. 400 ASA film is better for cloudy days or some indoor scenes. There's a trade-off, though. The faster the film, the more grain you get, and thus the lower resolution you can capture. Also, the faster the film, the faster the action you can capture, because since it requires less light because it's more sensitive, you can actually set your shutter speed higher for the same amount of the same relative exposure. I hope that's a bit that clarifies that. I'll now give a really cool rule of thumb that you can use to easily actually tell your exposure in a pinch. I'll bring out a new sheet of paper here so I can actually draw a diagram. This is called the Sunny 16 rule. And this will allow you to pretty much nail exposure whenever you want without a light meter when you're outdoors. So, I'm going to draw a few pictograms here. How do I draw this? There we go. We have a sun We have a sun with a cloud in front of it. We have just a cloud, and we have a dark cloud. So these are your four main exposure conditions: sunny, hazy, overcast, and dark overcast. So what you're looking for sunny is hard shadows. Just imagine a cloudless day and it's just the sun. That's what this is. This is, there's slight cloud coverage. The shadow, it's still clearly sunny. There are shadows, but they're kind of soft a little bit. Overcast means there's no shadows. There's a cloud that's in front of the sun. And then dark overcast is like if it's ever raining out and you know it's distinctly darker than if it were just overcast. That's what this is. So I'm going to write some numbers down. Oh, 5.6. Excuse me, 5.6. That says 5.6. Sorry about that. Like I said, this rule is called the Sunny 16 rule. Sunny, F16. That sounds like we're getting somewhere. Well, this is the foundation of learning exposure by eye. So here are the steps. You take your camera, you load it with your film. Let's say it's ISO 400 film. Okay, ASA 400 film. Let's say you've loaded it already. Now it's time to set your settings. And imagine it's a sunny day out. A sunny day out. First step is you take your shutter selector and you set it to the closest number to the ASA of your film. Since mine is 400, I will be setting this to 500 because that's the closest number to 400. Now it is sunny out. Therefore, I'm going to set my lens to f16. f16. 1/500th of a second at f16 with 400 ASA film will give you proper exposure. Now, let's say it's an overcast day. I'll set that to f8, like it says here. That will give you proper exposure. Okay? And for the quicker of you that are watching right now, yes, that means the exact same opposite. Let's say it's an overcast day. I can set that to f16 and just open up 2 stops here on the shutter to 1/125th of a second, and it would give me the same proper exposure. So either way, whether you give it 2 more stops of exposure on the lens, or 2 more on the shutter, or you can even do 1 and 1, so f11 at 1/250th of a second, that will all give you proper exposure. Because remember, it all goes back to the halving and the doubling of light. So, I hope that gives a little footing of exposure. Next, I'll go into how to actually load your camera and how to actually use your camera. So some cameras open like this, where the back comes off, although this is pretty uncommon for any camera you're likely to encounter as a beginner. So I'll actually show you on this Minolta XE5. I'll put a lens on here to make it look less strange for you. There we go. I won't be showing you on the Nikon F because this is a bit trickier to load for a beginner. Anyway, usually to open the camera, you have your rewind knob here, and you pull that up, and then once you pull it up a little bit, you'll hear the back unlock and the back pops open. Now you want to swing the back out. Keep this knob pulled all the way to the top. Okay? Now you take your film. This is just a test roll, so it's fine that I have this through the camera here. You insert the film into this blank chamber. Usually it's on the left. And then you want to press this knob back down and twist it a little bit so to make sure that engages with the cassette here. Next, you take your leader, you pull it across the film plane here, and there will be either a slot or a little hook or something to actually catch your film on the take-up spool. You put that in there, and then what you want to do is take your lever. It's usually a lever that's right here is how you wind on your film. And you give that one, fire the shutter to make this reset. I usually give it 1.5 twists, just to make sure that that's caught onto the take-up spool. You want to close the back, make sure it snaps, okay? And then continue that. And then you want to wind until your frame counter, in this camera it's here. Some cameras have it on the top here, or sometimes it's on the actual post of the wind lever. You want to wind the film onto when it says number 1, and then you're ready to take your photos. You'll notice here that as I wind this, this rewind knob turns. If that's not turning, your film has not loaded correctly. Now, some cameras, that's disconnected, but there will be some other way of telling that the film is advancing, like there will be some indicator here. So on the vast majority of cameras, if this is turning, it means you loaded your film correctly. If you keep winding and that doesn't turn, it means the film hasn't caught onto the take-up spool, and you need to open the camera to actually try and put that back. Now, do not do this, what I'm about to do, when you have a roll loaded, okay? I'm just showing you what happens to the film as it goes across. If you did this on a real roll, again, this is just a test roll. If you did this on a real roll, all your photos would be completely ruined, okay? Because the light is getting to it in an uncontrolled manner. You see, as I wind, the film is being pulled across the film plane and put it onto this spool. Okay? And a lot of times when you do that, it resets the film counter. So that's another reason not to do it. So let's say I reach the end of my roll. Remember I said you can't open the camera when the film's over there. The film has to be back in the cassette. So what you do is, on most cameras, there will be a button on the base plate. You want to press that button. Sometimes you have to hold it, but most of them you just press. And that unlocks the mechanism. So you take the little knob, the crank on this knob here, and you twist this until you hear a little click, and you feel it lighten up a little bit. That means that the leader has unhooked from the take-up spool. Then it is safe for you to open the camera. So you open this. Now, you want to keep going until this is all in the cassette here, but since this is a test roll, I like to keep it out because I'm reusing this. So in reality, you'd want the film to be inside there, like I showed with the plus X here. You want the film to be completely inside, and that means it's completely light tight. This is now ready for development. That's a whole nother story. Now remember, your film is one and done. Once it's exposed, either in the camera or unexposed, or not in a camera, in an uncontrolled manner, like I did that, it's toast, okay? You can only ever get the film to record one image ever. Or, if you do this, it's toast before you even expose an image to it. That goes before or after it goes through the camera. So let's say I actually shot this and then did that. All those images are now ruined. So you want to be careful about that. Now, as for lens choice, the most standard lens available for cameras like this is a 50mm lens. Now, like I said, that's the distance from the middle of the lens to the film plane, which is oftentimes indicated with little O with a line through it, like that right there. If you can make that like that, yeah. That distance there is 50mm. If I actually get a ruler out, I can put my finger at 50mm, put that there, and look at that. From the film plane to the center of the lens, the optical center of the lens, it's 50mm. This gives a very appropriate field of view. And by field of view, what I mean is this area here, and eventually the final image, will show approximately what your eye, the human eye, is focusing on. That is one of the three main focal lengths, we call, of lenses. This is another example of a 50mm lens. They typically come in faster speeds, so that would be f2, or in the case of this one, this is f1.7. A lot of times they come in f1.8 or at 1.4. 50mm lenses are generally going to be their fastest, and therefore give you best performance in low light. Now, the next one I'll show you is the probably most common wide-angle lens. This is a 35mm lens. So from the film plane to the middle there will give you 35mm, except not really in this camera, but that's some some advanced physics stuff that's not for today. Now, naturally, if you could imagine, since all light travels in straight lines, if 50 millimeters is there, and you shorten where the lens converges down, you can see there the angle of view actually increases. So instead of showing just this, it's showing more like this. A much wider field of view. I typically walk around with a 35 millimeter lens when I'm just walking around taking arbitrary shots. The 35 millimeter lens covers more of what your eyes see in their full vision. Remember, the 50 millimeter is what your eye is concentrating on. The 35 millimeter is what your eye sees. So this is the second most common focal length, I would say. It's a wide angle. Wide angles also typically come in 28 millimeter, 24 millimeter, even 40 millimeter sometimes. These are excellent lenses for walking around. The thing about this is oftentimes they actually are more expensive. These are probably the most expensive type of lenses. Wide angles typically cost more than standard lenses, or what we're about to talk about, telephotos. Now, I don't have a telephoto sitting right next to me. I'll get one right now, real quick. This is a telephoto lens in one of the more common focal lengths. This is 105 millimeters. And you'll notice they all mount the same way to the camera, using the bayonet mount. And this does the exact opposite of what the wide angle does. If you move the convergence out, you'll see that the 35 does this, the 50 does this, the telephoto, 105, or sometimes it's 135 millimeters, or even 200 millimeters, you'll have a much narrower field of view. It's like a telescope almost, right? These can be semi-fast. This one happens to be very fast for a telephoto. It's f2.5. But oftentimes, these will come around sort of anywhere from f4, 4.5, all the way up to 3.5 is usually what you'll see these at. And yeah, this is good for getting close-up images of things that you can't get too close to. Like, let's say, a sports game, or if you want to do some macro photography of things down on the ground, but you still want to stand up, you can use this to get optically closer to what you want to see. So these are the three main types of lenses that you're going to encounter: the standard, the telephoto, and the wide angle. Now they all have their different uses. Like I said earlier, when you adjust the aperture, you actually get different looks to what you're actually going to get on your final image. This lens opens up to f2. f2 gives what we call a shallow depth of field. I'll get rid of this. A shallow depth of field. Depth of field is exactly what it sounds like. The field is from you, your camera, out to, let's say, your subject here. Right? I'll mount the lens for demonstration. This is your field. Everything from infinity down to your camera. Depth of field is the focus area, right? So, I'll just state a fact here. f16, you will get more of your field in focus than you will at f2. By that I mean, as you're looking through the lens, on most SLRs, the complete lens will be completely open for when you're focusing, and then it will stop down. It will, nope, it's not completely mounted. Okay, it's not, this one doesn't want to behave for me, so I'll use this one. Okay. When you take the photo, the camera, oh, this is not working either. Oh, because I have the mirror locked up. That's why. That's why. Anyway, when you're viewing through it, the lens is nice and wide open to give you as much light as possible onto the focusing screen. When you take the photo, when you press the shutter button, it actually stops down the lens like that. You'll see? It stops down the lens like that really quickly, only for a fraction of a second. If I do that real quick, you'll see. See, just a fraction of a second, it stops it down. When you're looking through the camera, it's going to be at its widest aperture. And when you're focusing, you'll see, oh yeah, your focus is really selective. You can have the front of this in focus, you can have the back of this in focus, you can focus what's behind it, what's in front of it, really precisely. That's really cool. However, if you have it stopped down to like f11 and you take your photo, you'll notice a lot more is actually in focus than what you saw through the viewfinder. Like I said, the narrower apertures, the slower apertures, the smaller apertures, the higher numbers, give you a larger depth of field. More will be in focus. When you have a smaller number or a wider aperture, a faster aperture, less will be in focus. This is how we achieve that sort of portrait look with the blurry backgrounds and stuff. And that can be, really good if you're using a portrait lens. Like this is a portrait lens here, the 105 millimeter. This is used for portraiture a lot of times. And if I open that up to a 2.5, f2.5, I can get a really shallow depth of field, get that nice creamy background with all like the out of focus areas. That looks really nice. However, that's not too desirable if we're taking a landscape or an architecture shot. So, back to the 50. Likewise, if I'm taking an architecture shot or a landscape shot, I want to stop down. I want to have everything in focus. At f16, if you focus to infinity, everything from about from infinity to roughly 10 or 15 feet will be in focus. That's large. If I go down to f2, you will have only a few feet worth of, not even feet. If you're up close, within like person to person distance, you'll only have just a couple inches worth of depth of field. So that's how you can control your look using your aperture. There's another layer to this, the focal length. If you have a wide angle lens mounted, wide angle lenses, let's actually set all these lenses to f8. Okay? f8 is a good aperture if you just don't know what to shoot to get out of focus, in focus. So when in doubt, just shoot f8. If these are all at f8, the shorter focal length will give you a broader, a wider, a larger depth of field than one of a longer focal length. So at f8, if these are both at f8, this 50 millimeter lens will give you less in focus than this 35 millimeter lens will. Likewise, this 105 millimeter lens will give you less in focus than this 50 millimeter will at the same aperture. That's one of the reason why we call these telephoto lenses portrait lenses. In a portrait, of course, you want to have a selective focus. It makes the portrait a lot more flattering, makes the person look nicer. So we want to make a shallower depth of field. So a lot of times you'll use a telephoto lens, open it up all the way, so you get a really selective focus to usually the person's eyes in a portrait, and you'll get this really cool look. Same thing goes with a wide angle. If you're taking a landscape, a lot of times you want to get a lot in. You're using a wide angle, and you want to make sure that focus is deep. You use the wide angle to get that deep focus. So that's pretty easy. With that out of the way, you've seen me mount and dismount these lenses a whole bunch of times now. That should be pretty simple for most cameras. Sometimes there will be a button on the side here. You'll just press that in and rotate the lens. Nikons, if you have a Nikon, you want to take the lens and rotate it clockwise, and the lens comes off. And then you line up these black dots on the body and on the lens, and then you twist it counterclockwise until you hear a click. No matter what camera it is, you want to hear a click, okay? Unless you have some really old ones, but you probably won't encounter those. For a Minolta, this Minolta is the same, except you press this button on the side here, and you twist counterclockwise. Most camera systems twist counterclockwise to get off. And then to put it back on, you line up this red dot with the red dot in the body, and you twist it clockwise. Hear a click, and now it's mounted. For this Minolta SRT 101, it's the same, except you press down on this button here, like down this way. You'll see most cameras are pretty similar. There's a ton more ways that they can mount, but generally speaking, it's pretty easy to figure out because a lot of times it's just a button that's next to the lens mount, and When in doubt, you could always press it and twist the lens gently. Always do everything gentle with the vintage camera to see if the lens comes off. Do not drop your lenses. That should go without saying. Just as a point of note, most cameras that you'll come into contact with, like this Minolta here, this is a follower here. This gives the aperture data of the lens to the body for the meter. This has the same. It has a follower over here. But some older Nikons, I'll show you here, some older Nikons have a different system in where the meter actually mounts to the top of the camera, like so. It's the prism. And you want to mount the lens, but you want to make sure that this fork mates with the meter. You'll see as I twist the aperture, the meter knows what focal length, what aperture you're at. For the later Nikon versions that use these, what we call bunny ears, you mount the lens. It'll click automatically into place. You twist the aperture ring. If you're looking at the camera, you twist it counterclockwise and then clockwise, and then it synchronizes the aperture with the meter. Now, since we're talking about meters, I'll talk about meters. I'll actually dismount this one because this meter is a bit difficult to explain compared to the other ones. So I'll just put this back. As I had mentioned, this camera here, in this configuration, is not metered. As I just showed you, the meter is in a different finder, and I took that off. So this has no meter. You have to use an external meter. Something like this. This is an external meter here. I can, if I point that at a light, you'll see this needle is dancing around. So this is what they used to use in the days before in-camera metering. However, the camera you have probably has a meter in it, so I'll put this one aside. These two Minoltas have meters built into them. These have two different types of meters. The Nikon has a third type of meter, and these cover basically the three types of meters you're likely to encounter. Back to my lovely diagram here. Assume this is your viewfinder again. Some meters, the simplest, are just called matchstick meters, or just like over-under meters. And you'll have sometimes what looks like this on your side. It could be on the left, it could be on the right of your viewfinder. But it'll be like this. It'll look like that on the side of the viewfinder. And you'll have a little, do I have a paper clip or something? No, I don't. Anyway, you'll have a little needle that's sticking out like that. And as you adjust, once you turn the meter on, for example, on the Nikon here, you'd press on that button there to turn it on, that to turn it off. The SRT, you move this switch on the bottom to on. This Minolta, you click this switch on and off. Whatever it is on your camera, make sure to turn it on. Make sure your meter is activated. Once it's activated, you can start adjusting your aperture and your shutter speed. And then this, and of course you want to point the camera at your subject to make sure that you're getting the correct lighting. But as you adjust your settings, this needle will bounce up and down. It'll go into this plus area if you're overexposing, which means you need to either speeden your shutter or stop down your lens more, or the needle can be low, which means you need to open your lens or slow your shutter. You want to make sure that this needle here is in the middle, or as close as possible in the middle, to give you the best exposure. If you can't, always err on the side of overexposure. It is always better to overexpose your film than underexpose. So that's one type of meter. Now I'll talk about the next type, which is the second most common. This is what is called match needle. This is called a matchstick. This is called, because it looks like a matchstick, like a, if you laid out one of these on the side of the viewfinder, that's what it looks like. Match needle is kind of a false cognate here, in that we're actually matching the needle to something, like connecting it to something. Now, a lot of times you'll have a needle just like this one, and you'll have like your shutter speeds. I'll write some down. dot 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 dot. Imagine I'm not going to write all of them, but just imagine they have them here. So they have your shutter speeds over here. And then there's a third needle. Sometimes it looks like that. Sometimes it's forked. Sometimes it's a colored piece of plastic. But whatever it is this needle is going to move somewhere on this scale. Sometimes there aren't even shutter speeds listed. But this needle, this thin needle, is going to move. And you have to, through manipulating the camera settings, this circular needle, or whatever shape it is, or color, is going to move. And you want to make sure that this moves up and matches with this the meter needle. Once those are matched, you're good to go. The third main type that you'll encounter is the same here, except it does not have that second needle. It's just this first needle, and that points to whatever shutter speed you should use. So like you set your aperture first, and then it's going to point to a shutter speed, and then you want to manually go on the camera and set that shutter speed. That one's a little bit more involved, but rest assured, once you have your meter set, if your meter is working fine, you should have a perfectly exposed image. Again, if all else fails, if you have a completely manual camera even, just use the good old Sunny 16 rule. This won't fail you. And of course, if you even forget that, just err on the side of overexposure. Just cook the film. Film has what's called latitude, and it's really forgiving. If you overexpose it, you'll get most of the time a usable image. So yeah, that should be enough to get you into trouble, so to speak, with your new to you camera. Definitely aren't making any of these anytime soon, so they're kind of getting old. Just treat them with care. Store them in a cool, dry location. Do not leave them in a hot car. Do not leave them in the heat. The lubricant will run and it'll ruin your camera. Don't get them wet. That should go without saying. Treat everything gently. These are old. Some of these SLRs, like the Nikon F here, came out in 1959. These are getting up in their years. Some of them are 70 years old. Treat them with love, respect, and care. And they'll treat you back with love, respect, and care. So yeah, enjoy your camera in good health. Always keep it on a strap. And yeah, that should be it. Good luck.